Hi, friends. Lisa Greenwood here, welcoming you to a unique season of Igniting Imagination. We're handing over the host role to our friends Shannon Hopkins and Mark Elsdon from Rooted Good. They are experts in how churches are thinking about their property. Everywhere we go, leaders are talking about new ways to leverage the church's property for missional purposes. During this series of episodes, Shannon and Mark will connect us with guests who give incredible insights about how church property can serve the neighborhood, how to move through this conversation about church property with your congregation, the theology undergirding how we can use church property, ideas for reimagining church property beyond housing, and so much more. You'll hear from theologians, pastors, nonprofit leaders, religious news writers. These conversations are thoughtful, deep, practical, and will surely be a great resource for the conversations you may be having in your context right now. We're grateful for Mark and Shannon and the whole team at Rooted Good for this collaboration and their important work around church property for such a time as this. As always, if these episodes are meaningful to you, share with colleagues and friends and leave us a review. Thanks for listening. And now, here are Shannon and Mark.
Hello, I'm Shannon Hopkins, one of the co-founders of Rooted Good, and co-hosting this season with me is my colleague, Mark Elsdon. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Shannon.
Our theme for this season is Properties with New Purpose. As we've been working with churches across America, there are a common set of questions we keep being asked. Things like, what about rural churches? What about things other than housing? And what about churches where members don't want to change? Those are just a few of the questions we're getting asked. And while there are many questions, this season is full of amazing stories of churches rising to this moment. And across all of the season, we are seeing perseverance and passion, creativity and courage, renewal and rebirth. We want to introduce you to the pastors and leaders that are stepping out and showing us a new way. Their stories are phenomenal, and their work is helping to lay a path into a new and good future for the church and for the world.
So our question for this episode is, what do you do first when you know things have to change? When your church needs to change and you need to move in some new direction, what is it that you do first and how do you get down that journey? Our guest today is Jess Lowry. Jess is the lead pastor and executive director of Sunset Ridge Church of Christ in San Antonio, Texas. We're really excited to talk with Jess about her experience and the church's experience doing some incredibly new and creative things with their buildings and land. And as we dive into this, Shannon, what was some of the things that most excited you and interested you about the conversation that we had with Jess?
Man, Mark, I love they put it all on the table, and I love when she talks about wanting to flip that old song about putting up a parking lot to tearing up a parking lot. So I love the story of that being one of the starting places for them. And I I love the way that she talks about how many people in the community she knows now, like how that has changed, how the relationship with the neighbors has changed because of their work. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, she was really honest about how the work is difficult and long and requires some perseverance. I think that's really helpful to just be real about that. I was also struck by how there's sort of momentum that can be built by sometimes starting with something relatively small and then building from that. It's a bit like exercising muscles or working out, going to the gym. You kind of start with something and you do a little bit more, you do a little bit more. And then now they're on this roll of like, well, we have these numerous social enterprises going, and now we have ideas for like five more, and that I thought that was really interesting how there's sort of a momentum aspect to this work.
I absolutely agree. And, I feel like it's one of the first stories we've heard where there's so many multiple small enterprises happening through the local church. And I think that's really exciting. I also think one of the things that struck me was how God really seemed like he was going ahead of them, like, and actually ahead of their timeline. Even if the overall breaking ground of the project took a couple of years longer, some things happened way ahead of where they thought it was going to happen.
Mostly a result of listening to people and just responding to what was going on, as opposed to charting out some path that they thought they knew, and being really responsive is what seemed to lead to that. Yeah. Well, why don't we dive in and hear what Jess has to say?
Yeah, let's do. Hi, Jess.
Hi, Shannon.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us today. As you know, in this podcast, this season, we're talking all about the moment that the church is facing across the U.S. as it engages with both the opportunities and the challenges it has as it relates to building and land. Now, there have been a lot of stories in the news about churches closing, churches selling, and churches doing new development on their land. We've invited you here today because I absolutely love the story of Sunset Ridge Church of Christ. You all have been doing some amazing work, really looking at all the ways you can do different things with your building and land, but focused on your neighborhood. I'd really love you just to tell a little bit about your church, where you are, and the story that kind of took you down this path.
Sure. Thank you so much, Shannon. So I am the executive director and lead pastor of Sunset Ridge Church of Christ. Have been on staff there 11 years. I started children's ministry, family ministry, and back in 2018, all of us in church leadership really started to notice a continuing decline, both in membership and in contributions. You know, those are kind of the first two markers that a church sees, okay, something might need to change here. At that time, we just began a time of really deep prayer and consultation with some experts around the country in church change, in church growth. And there was a moment where one of our consultants from Cybert Institute at Abilene Christian came in, and we were looking at the organizational bell curve, and it was clear that our organization was about to be at the death point of the organization. We had kind of made that turn over the hill and had been just in that steady point of decline. And so the options that were presented to us at that moment were become a legacy church. So just kind of slowly, quietly close our doors. It was to engage in some sort of social entrepreneurship. It was to bring in a church planting group and do a replant. And those were kind of the three main options that were presented. Doing what we had always done was absolutely not on the table, or what we had been doing was not on the table. So that moment in the room, you know, the air kind of left. Everyone was a bit paralyzed and fearful of, what does this mean? It really was what I consider a moment of deep desperation in our church history, our 75-year church history. We just celebrated 75 years in May. So at that time, we came together. This was all of our ministerial staff, our eldership, all of the spouses and partners as well, in a time of deep prayer and consideration for how we would move forward, which path we would choose. We decided to go ahead and assemble a vision team of about 33 members of the church is what we ended up with. We did a really interesting sampling of diverse backgrounds and ages, experience in the church, inexperience of the church. So we took the demographics of the whole body and made sure we had somebody in their 20s, we had somebody in their 80s, you know, just bridging that gap, and started on a re-envisioning process that moved us from desperation to inspiration. Those are two markers that I use pretty consistently in my discernment process. Am I doing this out of desperation, or am I doing this out of inspiration? And so what was started down a pathway of desperation moved into inspiration.
Um, I love that. I love that as your kind of two pillars to move. But I'm curious. I mean, you had 33 people in your group to go on this journey, but did you feel like the whole congregation wanted to go on this journey?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Even with the level of intentionality that was built around what we called the vision team, and if we look at kind of the timeline of this, we saw this happening in 2018. It was fall of 2019 where we were really able to cast out to the congregation even just what the process looked like. And then we all know what happened in winter of 2020, right? So we had a very short window of time. I think one single in-person meeting that actually was a prayer meeting. We walked the entire campus. We have about a 30,000 square foot building, and we had a 1 acre annex parking lot that sits across the street from the church. So we spent a whole day walking and praying and listening for, looking around at the neighborhood, walking the neighborhood, and coming back and saying, okay, here's what I'm sensing how we need to move here. But that was the sole in-person meeting that we got to have in this process. So even with all of that really intentional work, there were people who just never were able to get on board. The idea of taking a 75-year-old culture and telling it that it needs to change very drastically and very rapidly was incredibly challenging, is still incredibly challenging in the middle of this work.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you ended up? So, kind of like we want to go back and trace how you got there, but just tell us where you are now and kind of what's happening now, and then we'll kind of roll back a little bit and see how you got to that.
Absolutely. So as of today, we have a beautiful community park on our 1 acre parking lot called Caris Park. It is the most incredible gathering place for our community and neighborhood. We just opened 2 weeks ago today. So, um, un-
Congratulations.
yeah, unbelievable thing that God has done. We have a nature-based preschool that takes up just about the first floor of our building. We have a co-working space upstairs, and we're starting on our vocational training program. So lots of new life and excitement from where we were in that room in 2018.
So you literally tore up a parking lot and
We
put in
did.
a park. Yeah.
We did. We like to say that we want to take that Big Yellow Taxi song and flip it inside out. Yeah, that has been the most beautiful, joy-filled project of my career. This parking lot was black asphalt, just a major heat load here in San Antonio, and we were able to tear it up to use all of the materials on site, so nothing left the property. It was all reused. We partnered with Good Acres, who I know y'all know and work with closely, to envision what the space would be like, how to get neighbors around the table as stakeholders, and then just dream about how would this place be used, what kind of who were we wanting to use it, and how could we program the park to make that happen. And so yeah, I'm there literally every day. I can't stay away from it. So
Um, I'd love for you to talk about how the relationship with your neighbors has
mhm.
changed through the process.
Yeah, so when we're back in that room at 2018, we don't know the neighbors. We have basically a couple of people who live in the neighborhood and attend the church, but the majority of the church makeup is commuters. And we go in the back door and come out, it's kind of like a suburban neighborhood where you're just pulling into your garage. That was how we were living church. We're in a very urban setting. So the parking lot that I'm talking about and the church are almost like a town square. There's multifamily housing and apartments kind of on three sides of the church property, and then the church is there. But we knew none of these people at all. My favorite story through this process, there was a neighbor as we started the rezoning process for the park who called the church office and was very unhappy. He lives right on the street that faces the park. And he was very unhappy about the rezoning. The church office called me, of course, and said, "Hey, you need to talk to this guy because he's really upset about the rezoning." And he and I are on the phone, and he's yelling at me about, why are you doing this? And I said, let's sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk. And so once we got to talking, this conversation was 3 years ago, and he was able to understand what we were trying to do for and with the neighborhood. Everything changed. And he and his wife are now, I would say, probably two of my most trusted um, companions and partners in this work. So that, that's one little snippet of hundreds of people who we know now that we didn't know 3 years ago.
That's amazing. I'm going to stay on that for a minute because I know one of the early things that you did was you let a young social entrepreneur in the city park her food truck,
Yeah.
her coffee truck in your parking lot. And I'd love to know like why you said yes to that and how it worked as a part of this
Mm.
process.
When when we finished the vision team process in 21, there was a plan that was set out. They had a very in-depth plan. We had spent a couple of years working on it. And one of the pieces of the plan was coffee. We knew in our particular neighborhood, lots of walkers, lots of active people, know where you could walk to get a cup of coffee. So we knew coffee was part of the plan. And our thought was when we get to the park, then we'll add a coffee trailer and coffee will come down the road. And this is spring 2021, summer of 2021. I get an email from Katie Best Richmond saying, I was driving around. I've been looking for a place and I've stumbled on your parking lot. Can I bring my coffee trailer there? So we're way ahead of the plan, right? This is not how this was supposed to go in our minds. And we weren't zoned for it. We hadn't thought through any of it. And what we have learned and we continue to learn is just to look for what God's already doing and partner with that instead of thinking we need to be the ones that create the thing. And so we took a chance and said yes. And what happened was that Katie's coffee trailer became this front porch for the neighborhood. We were able to get to know neighbors just very naturally and organically and build relationships over a cup of coffee in ways that we couldn't have done. It would have taken us years to get there, if we were waiting to the park until the park opened. Yeah.
How did you navigate the kind of um, interests of the neighbors in the neighborhood compared to the interests of the congregants and the members? Like I imagine in some cases they may have aligned, in other cases they may not have aligned, maybe even were in conflict to some extent.
Mhm.
I mean, parking's really interesting, even that. Like, so
Yeah.
often you hear churches members concerned about we need more parking or we can't, parking, and
Yeah.
then here you are tearing one up. But like, how did you sort of navigate that in a way that was honoring to all parties and
Yeah.
involved, and that.
Yeah, Mark, I would say that we're still navigating that. Like that is not over. It's something we navigate on a daily basis. One of the things that I have noted as I talk to people like Dr. Reed at ACU, who's responsible for the School of Theology and seminary programs, is that I wish that seminaries would teach listening better, that would teach really deep concrete listening skills, because I would say that was that has been the key. It was the key when the neighbor called me upset about the parking lot. It's the key when I have a member that comes to me and literally says, "What does a park have to do with Jesus?" It's about listening and trying to uncover what's under the surface there. What is your real fear and anxiety, and what is a need that's not being met here? And how can we address that? And sometimes not. Sometimes it's just we've lost a lot of people in our congregation. A lot of people have moved into other church spaces because they, this was not, this is not the particular place that they felt was meeting their spiritual needs anymore. That's a really big challenge, but I think listening is at the heart of it. And the Good Acres team and the work that y'all do with Good Futures and Make Good has been really helpful in helping us construct who is around the table in the conversation, because we built a park team that was a person that worked for the city. I think we had 2 or 3 people from the neighborhood, congregation members, a person on our leadership team. We were able to create a really nice, solid group of people to walk through the process together. Everything from how would the park be programmed, like what particular elements would be in the park, to interviewing architects and interviewing contractors. Like, they walked through that entire process. So I think all of that has been really helpful.
It sounds like, in a way, you've expanded the definition of what the church is. The church is not just the people that have joined it kind of
Right,
officially or whatever your membership looks like, but the
right,
church is the whole community that you are situated within. And when you've changed that perspective, it changes everything about
right,
how it all works. Yeah.
right. And we have a lot of curiosity around, even since the park has been opened, around when somebody enters the park, whether they ever come to church or not. That doesn't have anything to do with why we built the park. We built the park to say to the neighborhood, in that vision process, it became very clear that we were being called to be a church in and with and for our neighborhood. And so, being that we had never even come close to that before, it felt really important to do something that was kind of proving that to the community. Not that we're just saying, "Hey, we really want to be for you," but like, this is a need. There was no central gathering space, very little green space. There's one little pocket park in a very active young neighborhood, and saying, we want to be here with you. And the curiosity is, what do people experience of who God is just by walking through? And that went into the programming. Like, God is playful, and there's some really creative, fun, playful elements. And God cares about people connecting with one another. And so there are lots of points of connection. So, and obviously the environmental stewardship of God's creation. So we have a lot of curiosity around just what people are experiencing when they enter the space.
So you're saying that the park has something to do with Jesus?
Yeah, I would say so. Just a little.
A lot of the people that listen to this podcast are
Mhm.
pastors. And I wonder if you could just talk about the steps that you took as a pastor and a leader in the church, um, to help people catch the vision and stay with
Mhm.
you, like to go on this journey. I recognize that a lot of people left, and you've already talked about listening, but yeah, just what else did you do? Like, what did you find as the essential role to help the congregation
Mhm.
go to this new place?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, getting a group together that was a sampling of the body was very important. There had been, as things go politically in a church, you say, "Oh, well, that one group makes all the decisions," and so we needed from the beginning to get rid of that perspective or perception. Um, Additionally, as we were going along in the process, we would do these kind of big room report. So in the sanctuary before or after worship, kind of give reports on what was going on in the process. Those things were helpful in, I think, I'm going to dare say, to check our boxes on communication as leadership. Well, we told people that we were doing this. Remember, we were all in the sanctuary and we told everyone. That was a little bit useful. It needed to happen. But where we really got into helping to bring people along was we went around to each of our small groups. And it would most often be Taylor and I. So Taylor's our deputy director and my partner in this work. And we just sit and listen and answer questions and cast vision. Here's what's going on. What have you heard that you're confused about? What are you curious about? And clarifying misunderstandings. And then the next level was we because we're a small body, we have about 150 people. Our leadership has done a process where we'll split the whole congregation on a call list, and we will call every single person and talk through and listen and answer questions. I think we've done 4 rounds of that now through this process, and it's time consuming, and it's absolutely worth it, because that just helps even for the people who can't make the journey with us, who don't feel called to this particular mission. It has helped us to have conversations that help people leave well, that say, hey, we understand, and we will miss you, and we bless you for whatever other part of God's kingdom you're going to move into, and that's okay. So we've been able to do a lot of communication, and I think that's been the most important thing we've done.
Yeah, you just can't discount that, right? Like the time with people and to bring them with you. But it is time it does take time.
Yes.
And I think I'd love you to like this work is hard and long work, and yet it feels like you guys have moved pretty fast. Like you started the visioning process in 2018, you've already broken ground.
Mm-hmm.
You've got more projects in the pipeline. But this, I guess I'd like to know, where has this work been more challenging than you expected it to
Mm-hmm.
be?
Yeah, I think for sure all around, not all, I would say the people part of things. And even we've lost a number of members that were on the vision team that walked through this process with us. And I think had a perception of what this would look like, or the speed with which this would take place, because you say that it's gone pretty fast. And I have had people saying it's not fast enough. We haven't moved fast enough. We haven't worked hard enough. We haven't done enough. So, it just, but we know, I heard somebody say, if you're not committed, if you're not able to commit 15 years to a process like this, then don't start. So when we look at really from end of 2021, when we made the proposal to the congregation of this is where we believe that God has called us, we're only 3 years, and a lot has happened. So the around the people part has been really it's emotionally challenging, for those of us in leadership. These are people that we love, that we have been in community with, in relationship with. This is our family, and they're having to walk away and say goodbye. So that's really challenging. Additionally, really the pushing and the timing and kind of setting up these expectations of how things are going to go, and then needing to be able to pivot and pivot and pivot. I am a textbook Enneagram 8 personality, so I am real gifted at pushing things, and I think the thing that I've learned the most is to stop and be still and listen for where God's wanting to work instead of where I'm wanting to push things forward. We had a sign printed professionally that said Karis Park coming spring of 2022. And we were so certain that that was what we were going to be doing. And here we are, summer of 24, opening this park. So managing my own expectations as a leader and helping to manage the expectations of the congregation, I would say probably two of the biggest challenges.
Jess, you guys had a big leadership team and a lot of resource going into this project. What would you say to churches that have a shorter financial runway?
Mm-hmm. I'm struggling a little bit with the question because while we had at the start of the process a very large pastoral and leadership team, it actually, a number of things happened, and it ended up kind of being me and a couple of elders who were really burnt out on the process. So we had to re-envision our entire leadership structure as a part of this. And while we have an endowment that has helped fund this work, we have had to actively fundraise. For the first time, our church has never had to fundraise before, so we had to actively. We're in the process of a capital campaign, and I would say one of the things that has shifted as I talk about pushing and relying on my own strength is that we see God's provision every step of the way. And I believe that's true, whether or not your church has an operating, endowment like we do as a foundation or not. God has shown up in ways that we could have never anticipated, whether it was through a conversation with a neighbor, through a coffee trailer, through all of the sudden anonymous donation that covered the gap in funding that we did have, even with an operating endowment. So my recommendation is always to balance the action with contemplation, to be sure that the plans and the progress, and you keep you keep your foot on the gas pedal, and you stop and listen, because I believe that God is actively at work in all of this in the Big C global church right now. And it's just a matter of having the discipline to sit and listen and look for where God's at work.
No, thank you for that. I think you're absolutely right that we have to trust in the Lord's provision and that He brings partners that we would never ever expect.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
We're going to ask some rapid fire
Okay.
questions in a second, but before we do, I want to know, so the park, you've broken ground on the park, you've got the nature-based preschool, you've got a co-working space, you're starting your job training. What else is coming?
We have an entire facility remodel on the docket. So that 30,000 square foot building that I was talking about will undergo a major transformation and shift from being a space that's used 1 to 2 days a week for church programming into a community hub for the neighborhood. We're so excited about that. So we have a commercial kit. We got our commercial kitchen license, so we have some renters using that space. But we're really looking forward to expanding just kind of the way the facility is structured so we can increase the programming for the community. Additionally, we have a historic chapel that will undergo a facelift. There is talk of a inside coffee shop coming to life. We actually purchased the entrepreneur that we talked about earlier was able, because of her success in her coffee trailer in the parking lot, was able to launch a brick and mortar coffee shop and cafe, which was her dream. So we were really excited to get to participate in kind of the incubation of that. We have purchased the coffee trailer and have an incredible staff that runs that and have dreams of having their own coffee shop. And we have one particular spot in the church that I think that's going to happen. So lots of very exciting things in the works.
Has it gotten at all easier as you've done those like each time you do a new thing, does it, you kind of build that muscle and get a bit more,
Absolutely.
like figure out how to do it, how to decide, how to move forward, how to bring people along?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And one of the things that Taylor and I talked about on that Thursday night 2 weeks ago when the fence came down and we were out walking the park, just the two of us, naming everything that we do from here will feel easier. It won't feel quite as special as that one did, that very first one, but everything is easier, and it's easier to say yes to when somebody knocks on our door and says, "I've been searching for a place to have a nature-based preschool for 2 years." And when all of these little things that are happening, we don't hesitate as much anymore. Oh, is this wasn't the plan and this wasn't the order. It's like, yes, let's do that. And the framework that y'all have created through Rooted Good and then through Good Acres and all of that, that really gave us the confidence to be able to know, okay, we've got a framework for this. We've done this before. We know how to have these conversations. We know the questions to ask. So yeah, for sure.
When you talk about all the things you have going on, there's a lot of enterprising.
Mhm.
Like, really you're running some small businesses, whether it's the food truck and employing people. And, that I wonder if you could talk about how that role has changed and how you think about the work of social enterprise as part of the future of the church.
Mhm. My background before becoming a pastor was actually in business. And I had this idea when I became a pastor that I was going to draw a line and shut off the previous, decade of my life to now go into ministry where none of that was useful anymore. Similarly, our deputy director has a background in nonprofit and arts. And again, I'm going to draw this line because that's not useful here. And what we're seeing is all of that kind of coming to the center right now as the church is shifting. We can say we cannot stress about things like membership and contribution, though both are very important. But the reality is, I would say most of the time as church leaders, we talk about that because we're afraid that we're going to lose our facilities, right? Or our salaries, we're going to have to cut jobs, like if we're not making the budget. And so we have been so excited about the question, what happens if we take that out of the equation because we have these revenue generating things that are helping to fund the facility, helping to fund the salaries of the staffing? And what if the church could truly be about mission? So I think social entrepreneurship is going to be at the heart of the future church. And we talk a lot in our work about flourishing. And when we think about flourishing, we have this idea that if a person can find work that's meaningful to them, that they feel really good about, and have a place where they have a sustainable income to make that happen, that is a point of flourishing for them. So we believe theologically that that aligns with the values and mission of the church as well. So these people that we're talking about, whether it's the coffee truck owner, we have a young guy who was dreaming of opening a pizza trailer, and came to us, and so he prototyped on the church side of the parking lot, moved over to the park 2 weeks ago, and he's able to support his brand new family because of this space and this work that he's doing. He sold 80 pizzas on his first night out there. So and it so all of that, it both supports the church's infrastructure and supports the church's mission.
Well, I love it. I mean, we're such a believer in social enterprise, and it's just nice to hear how much is happening there and all the different ways that it's working. So, before we wrap up, we're going to ask you a few rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So, when you think about church members sitting in the pew, what is one thing you wish they knew?
I would say the heart and soul and prayer and discernment and blood, sweat, and tears that goes into this work. I think sometimes it's easy to you go to church on Sunday and then you go about your week and then you come back on Sunday and think like that's kind of what the rest of us are doing also, when we're actually like grinding day in and day out and on our knees in prayer, and we're not just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, but really deeply trying to do God's will in this particular place well.
You talked a little bit earlier, actually, about seminaries, but that's
Mhm.
one of our questions. What do you wish seminaries were doing differently, or training that they were offering to prepare leaders for kind of what church is like now?
Yeah, I think it's all around the people. When I've seen, my own experience and seeing other young people coming right out of seminary into this work, I think that the seminaries are training very well on um, on the head stuff, on all of the things up here. And I think, at least my experience, I'm a Fuller seminary grad. In my experience, I was trained very well on how to care for my own heart and soul. Well, that was a big part of the program. But when it comes to navigating difficult conversations and conflict and peacemaking in the church and listening well, I think across the board that would be really, really helpful to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When you think back to where you were at the beginning of the journey,
Mhm.
what's one thing you wish you knew then that you know now?
Pushing things isn't going to get you there any faster.
Mm-hmm.
Just working 60-hour work weeks and nonstop, pushing and pushing doesn't make Karis Park open spring of 22. And my gosh, I'm so glad it didn't, because we've learned more and met more people and experienced more in these 2 years of building this park. We had a field of dreams mindset, right? Like, if we build this park, then they'll come. And yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I know hundreds of people that I didn't know 3 years ago. So pushing doesn't make it get there faster.
That's great.
So you've described well the work that goes into this, right? The persistence, the kind of determination that this is not something that is sort of a quick fix, that this
Yeah,
takes time, it takes some years. Would you do it again?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Without hesitation,
Even though it's hard.
even though it's hard.
Yeah.
And there is a cost and all of those things, but no, I would do it all over again, and will. Well,
Yeah, and you still are. Right.
yeah, still
Right.
am.
Right.
But truly, I wake up every morning and I can't wait to get there and go do this work. So yeah.
That's beautiful.
Uh,
Yeah.
it is beautiful.